around for 4 years already, and we're still barely up to the starting point. So like Renee said, this is not something that happens overnight. More recently, when we went back to council in August with a request, they directed us to move forward. Part of that included having a neighborhood outreach meeting, which we're here tonight. Following tonight's meeting, what we'll end up doing is we anticipate sometime probably in January going back to council with the request to enter into a contract with environmental consultant, which I'll talk about in the next couple of slides, but also to get an actual resolution to still begin. I want to be clear, even at that meeting, that hearing, whatever the council decides, it's still not even at the stage of approving any kind of sphere, just to allow us to move forward. So that's where we're at right now. So again, kind of dovetailing off of that, I think it's important to understand too, technically there's still no formal application yet. A lot of folks that I've talked to throughout this year regarding this project have indicated this is moving too fast. And again, this has been a 4-year process just getting to tonight, and there's not technically a formal application. And I want to underscore that because although there may be some detailed questions tonight about what kind of development or project there's going to be, we don't have those details yet. We're still trying to get that fleshed out and vetted through the process. So again, staff right now at this point is working on trying to get a consultant under contract. And that's kind of a key critical path item here, because when we get that consultant under contract, if the council allows that, it's going to allow us to move forward with these technical studies. That's going to be able to give us all that detailed information, a lot of which will answer a lot of the questions you may have. So again, tonight is more informational based. We can talk kind of generally about things, but to get the actual detailed answers you might be seeking, we're not there yet. And again, as studies are prepared, more detailed information will become available. At the end of this month, I'm going to share a link with you guys. We're going to have our own dedicated webpage for this project that you can keep checking on as you wish. We'll keep it updated with upcoming meetings. As studies are available, we'll post it on there. That way you always know exactly where we're at in the process, and that way you can stay informed. And then I also want to highlight too, there's going to be additional opportunities for public input. So if you don't get to your question tonight, or for the folks that are online, if we run out of time, just know that this isn't the end all be all. You'll be able to have other opportunities to give your input. So moving forward, here's kind of the anticipated schedule. And again, a lot of this stuff can fluctuate depending on how things play out. But, we're here tonight at the neighborhood meeting. Again, sometime in January, February of next year, we anticipate some kind of city council meeting to be able to move forward and get that actual resolution. It's going to take about a year to a year and a half for environmental consultant to prepare all of the required technical studies and go through the environmental analysis. So once that gets underway, there'll probably be some lag time where you don't see a ton of activity, but preparing an environmental study of that magnitude can easily take a year to a year and a half time. So we anticipate, that could be, the environmental document could be released for review sometime in February or March of 2022. There'll be a minimum 45-day public comment period on that. That takes us roughly into the summer of 2022. At which time we'd have to go back to the council to certify the EIR, and then sometime late summer, maybe early that fall. At that point, we'd be able to submit just the application to LAPCO for consideration. So just to give you an idea, again, it's been 4 years to get up to this point, and we're talking about another 2 years probably to even get to an application to LAPCO. So really the heart of this discussion or information tonight is going to be centered around frequently asked questions. A lot of these questions are questions that I've received in the past year or so since I've been involved in this project. And we'll take questions at the end, but I really want to get through this, and then hopefully it will answer some of the questions that you may have or not. So the way that I structured these is I wanted to talk about first sphere of influence related questions, and then I'll dig a little bit deeper to annexation, and then utilities questions talking about water. And the reason why I separated it that way is because really what we're talking about is a request just for a sewer change. That said, a lot of the questions I tend to get are related more to the detail and actually annexation and becoming part of the city. And I want to be clear, that's not what we're really, that's not the proposal. The proposal is just for sphere change only. But recognizing that a lot of the questions still do drill down to the annexation phase, I still want to go over some of those questions and that process. So I'll go ahead and move on. So first of all, what is a sphere of influence? Renee kind of touched on that. A sphere of influence is really just a boundary line adopted by LAFCO, the Local Agency Formation Commission, that really establishes a future boundary and service area that a city might grow to in the future. It can take 10, 15, 20, 25 years to be annexed, sometimes longer. It just really depends. And also, you'll see this as a recurring theme. Being within the Clovis sphere of influence does not mean you're within the city. Your property is still under the county of Fresno. You still abide by their regulations in terms of how you use your property. You're still in the county of Fresno, even if you become part of the city sphere. So I want to make sure that's clear. So how is the sphere of influence different from an annexation? Well, really, again, the sphere of influence is just a boundary of a probable future growth area. The annexation is when you actually become part of the city. So until annexation actually occurs and is approved, you're in the county. So in terms of if you have animal keeping or any kind of businesses out there, that's all county jurisdiction up until the point. So another question I often get is how will use of my property change if it's included in the SOI amendment? So again, if you're included in the sphere, use of your property will not change. You can keep your animals, you can have whatever businesses you have out there, assuming they comply with the county regulations. And your property, again, and allowable uses will continue to be subject to county of Fresno rules and ordinances. So can I still develop my property if it's within the Clovis SOI? Yes, since your property is still in the county jurisdiction, following their procedures, you would still go down to them for any permits you need. The only thing that may change is you may be subject to some city standards depending on what kind of development. If you're talking about adding another barn, for example, probably not. But if you have a piece of property that you want a shopping center to go in and you're within the sphere, well, then we may have a little more to comment on. But generally speaking, you'd still be able to develop your property as you would today. So what happens if I don't want my property to be included in the sphere of influence change? Well, the kind of simple answer is the LAFCO is really the agency that adopts or approves these boundaries, and they do have to create kind of a logical boundary, if you will, for the site, and that's really because we don't want a bunch of zigzag lines. So the short answer is that you may end up having to come into the sphere depending on what LAFCO ends up deciding and county. So, as part of this process unfolds, we work really closely with the county and LAFCO, and that will help determine the ultimate boundary. But based on the council direction, the boundary that we showed you in an earlier slide is the one that we're proceeding with as a proposed one. It doesn't mean that's going to be the final one, but that's what we're moving forward with studying. Kind of moving on to the annexation questions, because I do get a lot of those related about what happens if I do become part of the city. I wanted to kind of talk about a few of these. So we kind of touched on it, but how is an annexation different from an SOI amendment? Well, the annexation is the actual process of becoming part of the city. Once that's approved, if you're part of an annexation, then you become part of the city of Clovis, no longer in the county. So how would or could my property be annexed? Well, generally speaking, annexations occur from two of the following situations. One is it can be initiated by an actual property owner. So for example, if you have a property and you want to be annexed, you could come to us and apply for an annexation. The other way is if you're included as part of an annexation from somebody else. And again, it kind of goes back to the logical boundaries and needing to be part of that in order to create a logical boundary. So I don't want to get into the weeds of how that process goes because it can get pretty cumbersome, but those are generally the two ways that a property can be annexed. So how will use of my property change if annexed to the city of Clovis? So say an annexation happens and you go from the county and however it happens, you get annexed and all of a sudden you're in the city. Well, we have a term you may or may not be familiar with, but it's called legal nonconforming. So if you have uses out there right now, businesses, animals, and all that It's not like the city's going to knock on your door and say, hey, you got to get rid of your horses and chickens. As long as everything was there, assuming it was legal and approved from the county, those are essentially grandfathered in. So you can keep that. If you have a business out there, animal keeping, that sort of thing, you can keep, and it'd be considered a legal non-conforming use. However, if you decide to at some time expand your use or develop your property, then it would trigger the new need or the new standard of the city. So as long as you're keeping everything the way it is, then no big deal. But it's at which time you want to develop your property or expand your use, then you may have to start complying with the City of Clovis regulations. So utilities and services. So I get a lot of questions related to water. I'm sure most of you know there's some of the properties out there have a lot of water, some don't have any, and everywhere in between. So depending on your situation, these answers will satisfy your questions. So the question I often get is, how will my well supply be affected by surrounding development, if at all? So generally speaking, as new development occurs within the city, when we have new development, we don't allow new wells, and we require them to be taken offline. So generally speaking, as development occurs, there could be essentially wells taken offline, which could help your water supply because then there's fewer wells in the area competing for water. And that goes for ag and domestic. So how can I connect to city water and or sewer? In order to connect to city water and or sewer, the following needs to occur. One, your property has to be within city limits. So essentially, we don't give water and sewer infrastructure utilities unless you're within the city. We get that question a lot. And then also, of course, the infrastructure needs to be available. So depending on where you're at, you may have water and sewer pipes near you, and maybe really far away. Either way, you have to have the infrastructure there to service your property. And then lastly, connection fees have to be paid by the property owner. So depending on the situation, when that happens, will have to be paid to connect. So here's a question that comes up quite a bit as well. Can I continue using my well for irrigation if my property is included in the SOI and or annex? Yeah, generally speaking, if your property is within the SOI but not within city limit, continued use of your well is subject to governance by the county. Again, still in the county until you're annexed. So even if you're annexed to the city, the provisions of the Clovis Municipal Code would apply, which would generally mean no new wells be permitted. So you can use your existing well for irrigation purposes under certain circumstances. So in terms of, and you can also continue to use it domestically too until you develop or well fails, at which time you have to connect to the city. If annexed, how soon will I need to connect to water or sewer? Well, for water, currently there really isn't a time limit to connect. However, to connect to city water, you would be required if and when you choose to develop. Again, like I was saying, when you develop or expand, or if your well fails, then you'd have to connect to city water. Otherwise, you can continue using your well, even if in the city. For sewer, currently the code requires connection to sewer within 3 years of the sewer infrastructure becoming available to the property, which we define as being within 100 feet of your property. So generally speaking, if we have infrastructure that runs 100 feet or less to a property, the timeline as the code would be, we have 3 years to connect to sewer. Another question, if I cannot afford to pay connection to water or sewer, what are the funding mechanisms? And currently right now, the municipal code for the city of Clovis provides for financing the connection fees over a 10-year term. So that's really the only mechanism that can be offered for at this time. So where does the city of Clovis and county water supply come from? Generally, the city receives its water from a combination of city wells and surface water. And as the city continues to use more and more surface water treated through the water treatment plant, which comes from Kings River, Pine Flat. County water, as I'm sure you know, is served by private domestic wells. So in terms of just general questions, these are ones I often get, and I'll go through these, and then we can open it up to question and answers. So will there be other opportunities for input? Yes. As I mentioned earlier, this is not the end all be all. I'm going to give my contact information. It's on the agenda. You have my direct office line, my email. You can always reach out to me and I'll get back to you. If I don't have the answer myself, I'll work with my team and staff to make sure that we get you the answers that you need. So there will be additional opportunities for input. How can I stay informed? As meetings and hearings occur, such as tonight or when we go back to council, you will be noticed accordingly. So keep an eye out as things occur. You can also reach out to me, like I said, and then I put the link on here. It's also on your agenda. Check later this month. We're going to have the page up and running. We're going to keep that up to date. So you can always check in if you're there. I'll always have a section on there about upcoming things, ways to contact me. So, and then I'll try to keep a general or anticipated time fluid on there so you kind of have an idea of what's going on and where we're at in the process. And then here's my contact. Again, it's on my page, but that's my direct office line as well as my email, which I believe most of you have by now. So with that, that's what we have for the presentation information. We'll do a Q&A. I do want to be mindful of being able to allow everyone the opportunity to speak a little bit. So maybe the first go around will allow you up to 5 minutes to comment, and then we may have to cut you off. If we have more time at the end, we can kind of start cycling back to people. I also want to make sure we get the questions from the folks online. So we'll hop back and forth. We'll do one question here, and then we'll hop online for questions if there are any. And then we'll just keep that going. So with that, I can invite anybody up for questions, comments, concerns. Yes, and if we can, because of the WebEx, would you mind coming up to the podium with the microphone? That way, everyone can get a question.
One of the things you said about if a developer wants to be annexed, that you're going to be forced to annex him if you're part of the property?
I didn't say anybody would be forced to. I'm just saying, generally speaking, depending on what the situation is, annexation.
It seemed to indicate that you're going to be annexed too when you develop it, because that's just what LAFCO is going to require.
Well, it depends on the situation. So for annexation, and of course, it's different in the direct rig area because of the agreement, but generally speaking, if there's a situation and the way annexation works, which I know you're familiar with, sometimes you may have to be included in that. Like I said, it's going to depend on the situation. So I wasn't saying anyone's going to be forced to, but there are situations where people may go through a vote or the property may be included in it. So
on some of this development, one development next to me seems to be saying that they don't have to put in a sewer line, that they're just going to attach to a different sewer line for now and let the city take care of it later. Are they going to be doing the same type of thing out here, where they can just do it halfway and just the city's going to have to pay for all the sewage development later?
you're asking about project-specific things. It's really not. We don't have a project in front of us, so we need to analyze the way it's going. It's really going to depend on what kind of development occurs in the future. We're not there yet, so you're asking pretty specific questions about project scenarios that we just don't have that information yet.
Well, this is where they will come to. And
It may, but we're just not there yet.
Are you going to do much of a traffic report, including the
Yes.
Fowler Avenue between Keys and Lee?
So once we get the environmental consultant under contract, there will be a full traffic study involved in that. I don't know what the scope of work is yet. Once we get them under contract, that's when they'll work with the county and our city engineers to determine what that overall scope is going to be in terms of the intersections and streets and stuff. So, but there will be a full traffic analysis, and that will be made available.
You're talking about using your well for irrigation. Doesn't anybody out there use the canal or the President Irrigation District at all?
Which area are you referring to specifically? North of Shepherd?
Yeah.
I don't believe currently they're in FID.
They're not in that area? Okay.
Hello, I'm Paul Armendariz, Assistant Public Utilities Director. So the area in Shepherd, or really north of the Enterprise Canal, is outside the FID, the Fresno Irrigation District, so we do not have that rate of access to surface water. That's your question.
All right, thank you.
So we'll take a question online and then we'll go back to here if anybody else has any questions or comments.
I have a question from Jared Callister. He's asking, when are assumed development densities figured out? I assume you need density for the EIR.
That's correct. So the question was about densities and when we might have a actual project description. And Jared, you are correct. Before we start the EIR, we will have to flesh out the details of what kind of densities might be out there and which properties they might be on. So that's correct. When that project description is completed, we can make that available. So we're going to take one more question from the senior center, and then we'll go back to online questions.
So if we have a pre-existing domestic well and ag well, and we like way down the road when we become annexed and we're in the city limits, will we be required to not utilize those ag? Say if we have 10 acres and we have walnuts on it, are we not going to be allowed to use that ag well or domestic well to service those? That's one question. So,
Yeah, you will, as I understand it, you'll be able to continue to use that well for irrigation purposes. Yes.
perfect. And then, dumb question, but so in regards to the Heritage Grove area, when you guys took that into sphere of influence, just because I'm trying to figure out the time frame of when that was gonna I know it's a gradual thing, but for us property owners for this area, how long did that take to solidify the sphere of influence so that can kind of give us all kind of an idea of what we can.
So
Just ballpark.
yeah, again, I don't remember exactly when you came out on the presentation, but going back to the timeline that I had on there, if we start the environmental review, I'll say January for easy. It's going to take a year and a half. And then after that, it has to go up for public review. It will take a minimum of 45 days. And then we have to, respond to the comments there. So before we even get to LACO for them to consider this as a viable application, we're talking probably a good 2 years from now, 2 years. And that's just for a severe change. And that's assuming everything goes smoothly and, may or may not. But so that's 2 years right there. Rough timelines, it could take 2 to 3 years realistically before the spheres that would change. And that's just for the sphere. It doesn't necessarily mean the annexation.
And then for some of us that are indirectly affected by the development that's going on right now for graphic stuff, like Fowler and Beehiner and it's just crazy, man. Which I'm sure you guys are aware of, but the cyclones and sonar and everything. Do we just work with the county to try to get some stoppage or, I know Fowler and Beehiner, it's something more of an awareness for stuff there or even Beehiner. It's kind of crazy. We have to go straight to the county or with the county or something like that.
I'm not sure I understand your question in terms of
So right now,
with the road closure. I know there's road closures out there right now because of the Lennar development. And
yeah,
probably
so
it's
just we have semi-trucks and stuff like that
Sure.
going on, and I see that happening as we develop. But would you recommend? Is there someone city that can help us contact someone at the county to kind of help with what's happening currently right now? Because we just have an influx that's into everyone that lives on Beehiner, Fowler.
Yeah, if you want to email me and my contacts on the agenda, I can give you an indication of when those road closures are anticipated and what we might have coming down the line in terms of future road closures, we do construction there, if that helps.
Yeah, no, just something to include the stop signs and stuff like that. That's what we're doing. The big thing.
Yeah, send me an email and I'll get you the information you need for that.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so we'll go ahead and take another question from online.
We've got a question from E. Schmidt asking, can you disclose who the applicant is and what property within the proposed sphere of influence they own?
Yeah, so the applicant that we're responding to for the request, which is, kind of started this, is Wilson Premier Homes. In terms of the actual holdings and the actual project, again, we don't have the project description pushed out. So we don't know truly which properties are going to be included for potential development at this time. As soon as we have that information, we'll post it to the city's website page that we're going to have up and running by the end of the month. That's correct, yeah. Yeah, so for those of you online, there was a question about which other properties the applicant owns or controls, other than the Pecan Orchard that you might be familiar with. I'll leave that to the applicant. I don't have that information yet on the exact properties that they own. So until I get a formal application, I want to speak on their behalf. If they'd like, they can talk to that. Sure. You want to come up? Or anybody else from the applicant? Do? Yeah, I'll meet you halfway.
Hi, good evening. I'm Dirk Bushel. I'm a consultant with Wilson Homes. As you probably are aware, the company owns the Spenceley Walnut Orchard, Pecan Orchard, excuse me. They've owned that for some time. With respect to the other area, which would be to the due east, they're accumulating opportunity to purchase property and are in contract with some of those property owners closer to the dam. We're not really at liberty to get into how many acres or which properties are under contract, but there's a fairly substantial amount of acreage in that area that's under contract with Wilson Homes. And the intent is, just so everyone knows, the intent is to take knowledge Wilson Homes has accumulated in developing the Dominion and Harlan Ranch, be very, very successful properties, and try to emulate that, taking the best pieces out of both of those projects and applying them to these properties. That's our ultimate goal.
Any other questions from inside the senior center? Yes, we have one.
In your presentation, you spoke briefly about legal noncompliance, and I didn't quite catch whether that was during the sphere of influence change or whether that was the annexation change. But specifically for our septic system and our water wells that we have on our property now, you said that's fine. We're going to be able to keep it just the same until there's a change. And if we could provide some more specificity on that regarding if we a building permit to remodel something, or if there's, you could just expand on that a little bit.
Sure. So generally the process, and so just assume for a minute you're in the sphere, but you're not annexed to the city, and you have a 2-acre property and you want to build a new barn. When you go to the county for your permit, they'll still route it to us for comment, and more than likely it's not a big deal. It's just a barn. Now, if you have the same 2-acre property and you want to build a strip mall there, well, you might have a land use designation on there that we'll have to be mindful of in terms of certain setbacks and requirements to see how it's going to develop. Because again, the sphere of influence is a probable planning boundary. So while you may still go through the county for the permitting per se, they'll still request comment from us because they're saying, hey, city, as a probable future boundary, do you have any comments on this property owner's proposal to build a strip mall? So it really depends on the magnitude of the project and the expansion of use that you're talking about in terms of legal non-conforming. Now, to get to the legal non-conforming uses, that only applies if you're annexed. So for simple numbers, if you have 10 horses and 5 pigs and 2 chickens, and that's all compliant with the county, well, if you become annexed to the city, you can keep those 10 horses and 5 pigs and 2 chickens, whatever I said. So now if you're trying to add more, like double that, well, that's when you'd have to comply with city standard and wouldn't necessarily do that. So
Sure, my question, more specifically to the utility. Will I be compelled to hook up to the sewer? Will I be compelled to give up our well and hook up to the city water supply?
Going back to the sewer again, if the sewer is within 100 feet of your property, the infrastructure to be able to connect, we have the provision in there that you'd be required to connect within 3 years. That's for sewer. For water, if you're using a well for irrigation, assuming that well is fine, no big deal, then you can stay on that well until it fails, or you need city water, not city water.
And so the existing wells are grandfathered in, but you can't drill a new well.
That's correct.
Can you modify those wells? Can you make them deeper? Can you service them?
I'll leave that question for Paul or Mike. This is Mike Harrison, our city engineer.
Yeah, there are provisions for you to be able to repair and refurbish or even deepen your well under certain conditions, as long as it's not affecting the water table, things like that. So.
I emailed you back and forth on the possible land usages. This is just showing the actual sphere of influence.
Sure.
That's the 2 different proposals from Wilson that showed the densities and their location relative to some of the existing properties there. Is that something that's firmed up or you can comment on, or is that something you can show us a slide of? Talk about it a little bit.
I don't have a slide of it tonight. If you want to email me, I can kind of go into what Dirk said. I don't know the specifics of all their holdings. I mean, it's pretty well known. They have ownership of at least the pecan orchard right there. But in terms of anything outside of that, I'm unaware of it at this time. So
you already emailed me the most recent map.
Right. With the
Showing,
land uses.
a possible expansion adjacent to Shenandoah. That's just not going to be covered tonight.
Yeah, that'll be down the road. But I'll have the land use map up there for the areas that we do have general plan designations on. I'll put that on our website. So if you check back on that link on the bottom of the agenda, by the end of the month, I'm going to have all that information up there. So we'll go to another question online.
We had a number of questions about the density of the project. And there's also a question, if you live within 100 feet of sewer and must connect, does the homeowner have to pay for all of the trenching costs and improvements costs to the trench for 100 feet to their property?
So related to the sewer one, generally, yes, the property owner would bear those costs to sewer. In terms of questions related to density, we don't have that level of information yet. Again, there's no formal application what the project might entail. Certainly as part of the process, we may have to do some kind of general plan amendment to assign land use designations there, but tonight for this meeting, we don't have that information. As it becomes available, we will make it available to you all as well. So we'll take one more question from the audience before you go.
Eventually, they're going to be approved to put it in the city spirit. So my question is, so the pecan orchard occupies the north corner of Shepherd of Somerset. Then there's a project, there's 2-acre parcel north of that encompasses approximately 50, 35 houses. Are they going to section just the pecan orchard and leave those 2-acre parcels that's north of the pecan orchard out of the annexation or the sphere?
Well, the proposed sphere is what you see here, so.
No, I
kind of-
understand that.
right.
Does it go in sections? Do they chop it up over time? Or do they include the whole parcel at once?
Well, so for where we're at right now, if the sphere moves forward with this boundary and hypothetically is approved, that's what it would include all in one plan. They're not going to section off.
So that would be the general plan, go into the city's general plan.
Well, the general plan assigns the land use. So depending on, again, when we get the application and we know what land uses are going to be proposed, there would be a general plan amendment to assign those land use designations to those particular properties, depending on what the applicant wants to do. Now, in terms of annexation, we don't even know yet what properties may or may not be included in an annexation. We don't have an application for that. So I can't even make a reason
No, I-
guess on what might be included.
It's
So
pretty early in the process.
it's still very early.
So
It's a good question, but it's a little rough.
the next question would be, so he makes the application. The timeline from the application of the proposed sphere of influence to acceptance of the sphere of influence, annexation process, is approximately 2-3 years.
Really, yes, it really depends how things are run. If anything's going to be run concurrently, if it's going to be truly standalone with just the sphere, and then, once the sphere is done, and then the annexation soon after.
I would think it happened quite contiguously.
Possibly, but
Otherwise,
it depends on what the applicant.
It's used for a long time.
Yeah, it'll depend on what the applicant's goal is and their timelines for development. But generally speaking, yeah, 2 or 3 years before at least the sphere is done. And it's possible that there could be concurrent, annexation along the way, but generally 2 or 3 years is a good rough timeline.
So the problem is that in a lot of these areas, there's diminished water capacity, so to speak, with the wells, their capacity to pump. Gallons per minute. West of the proposed sphere of influence is already in the city.
Portions of it, yes.
Well, it goes up to as far as, what, Hammer?
Mhm.
There's ponding basins in this area that are dry. So the question is, why this is being in the process, what is happening to the groundwater in the proposed sphere?
So as part of this process, as I mentioned, the environmental analysis, part of those technical studies include doing utilities analyses more at length. Specifically, when we submit an application for a sphere change to LAFCO, they do what's called the municipal service review, and they analyze in detail the ability to serve sewer and water this area and what the plan might be to serve that area and highlight any deficiencies. And again, that's part of those technical studies that are there to be able to then determine what course of action may be needed.
I
to
get that,
accommodate
but in
development.
the meantime, the water situation gets worse and worse over time. It's not getting any better. There's not any rain. The groundwater is drying up. The wells are not producing like they used to 10 years ago, 15 years ago. You got from 30 gallons a minute to 5 gallons a minute. So it's, with all the development that's gone around this area, without having city water and sewer, those properties become less and less valuable as time goes on. So the more development they've done, the less value the existing people in this proposed sphere of influence have. It's not a good situation. So, okay.
So we'll take another comment online.
What would the zoning be? And would it be the same for existing landowners?
So again, the zoning is a pretty detailed question at this point. We don't even know what the land designation is going to be, so we don't have that answer in terms of what the zoning would be. Zoning or pre-zoning wouldn't happen until annexation occurs, even if it's just the sphere, even though we'll assign a land use designation to it, it doesn't get pre-zoned until as a requisite for annexation. That's much further down the road, so we don't have that information yet. And we'll take one more online.
I have Jared Schumer, or Schuman, my apologies. Jared, I will unmute your mic now.
Yeah, we can hear you, Jared.
Hi, Rich, here to a father who lives north of the Wilson Peak on the intersection in Stanford. And my question is the LAFCO process. Curious, you could correct me. It's my understanding that at the upon landowners and or registers. So adjacent partners have vote in an annexation.
David Fye, are you on the line? Did you get that question? Okay, Dave Fye, you're unmuted. Can you hear us, Dave?
Ricky, it's Dave. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Did you
All
get
right.
that question?
I did. And annexation, generally speaking, in this area is probably going to be what's called inhabited, meaning there are 12 or more registered voters in the project area. And those voters do have the opportunity to protest. And if 25% or less protest, then the commission can approve the annexation. If it's 25 to 50%, then it has to go to an election. And if it's over 50%, the project is terminated. So there is an opportunity for registered voters in a project area to protest an annexation and to terminate it. But it is generally the commission's intention that a developer and the city will work with neighbors to find out what their concerns are and to address them as adequately as possible, so that their protest is considered in the context of what their concerns are. It's possible for registered voters to terminate projects at the commission, and we'll just have to kind of cross that bridge when we get to it. There could be some registered voters that have been waiting a long time for annexation because they see benefits to being in the city, and there could also be voters and landowners out there that want to keep a rural lifestyle. So generally speaking, it's really it takes a village to annex land, and I think that's something that Clovis is pretty responsive to. Thank you.
Sure. I guess the heart of my question goes to if annexation is just limited to the applicant's property, wherever that might be, it seems that the process, if it doesn't include adjacent landowners or there's no mechanism for that, I'm not sure I understand how the community fits into this process.
Well, there's a couple of processes. Ricky's been describing the general planning for that the residents and property owners in the area can look forward to in the next 24 months. So that's one process. When we get down to specifics of an annexation, to some degree, that really depends on the boundaries and what logical boundaries there are and how those boundaries respond to the city's service plans. But in the meantime, there's always outreach, whether it's a developer reaching out to property owners or the city reaching out. Sometimes it's a matter of just again, finding out what a resident who initially may be opposed to annexation, what their concerns are, and to see if there's anything that could be done to address their concerns.
So that's this services from city, and while it makes sense, services did those follow a property line, but they might follow a reasonable. And I get guarding services, the water submit. I think the service extension is a and fire, and how and is that coming out of you, and how do you plan the majority of the area proposed here doesn't have it.
So this is Ricky. I know you're breaking up just a little bit, but I think I got most of your questions. So I'll paraphrase it. If I'm wrong, let me know. So you're generally talking about the services, and again, I want to go back to the municipal service review that would be prepared by LAFCO to, at least as it relates to water and sewer and other city services, to be able to give us the information we need to know what's going to make the most sense. As part of this project too, because this is an area that wasn't previously included in our sphere, we may have to update our overall city sewer and water master plan. We're going to have other utilities analysis done as part of that to be able to determine the service needs and how to get it to where it needs to go based on the application. But in terms of detailed sort of answers about where that's going to go or how it's going to service a particular property or area of the sphere, we don't have that information yet. And a lot of that will come, throughout the process in terms of doing those service updates, but also once we know the designations that are going to be proposed on some of these lands out here.
Well, I understand what you mean, but I mean, benefit analysis, while going out this direction, my concern is that adjacent properties have the opportunity to receive, even if they might not be necessarily sense services in all these areas. But I guess we'll see the process unfolds.
Yes, thank you. So we'll go to another question here. Hang on a second. Is there anybody else in here that has a question? Okay, you can come up. Yeah, do you mind keeping your mask on though? Yeah, please do. Thank you.
So as I understand it, then, if the people in the area really are against this, then it does go a LAFCO vote possibly, and 25% or greater can actually stop the sphere of influence from happening. 51 or 25? I heard 25 from the gentleman on the thing.
David, David Fye, this is Ricky. Can you clarify the process again as it relates to inhabited annexations and the percentages of when protests would take effect?
Sure. The gentleman at the podium there is asking about what we call protest. And at the annexation level, not at the sphere of influence, but at annexation, when one is proposed, then that we at LAFCO are required by law to look at registered voter protest and frequently landowner protest. So the sphere of influence, as Ricky had said, is not an annexation. It is simply a boundary that's really recognized only by LAFCO. It doesn't change taxation. It doesn't change jurisdiction. It is a planning boundary that LAFCO adopts, and then annexations must be consistent with that. So if you were to take the illustration that's up there, the proposed sphere of influence, and cut that into maybe 15, 20, 25 pieces, those are, if it was to shatter or look like a jigsaw puzzle, that's the kind of annexation pattern that you would be looking at. And each one of those annexations would have their own mixture of landowners or registered voters that we would take into account and their positions and feelings into account as we evaluated the annexation. But the sphere of influence is not something that it can be objected to at the city council and even at the commission, but it is not, we don't have the same kind of 25, 50% thresholds for the sphere of influence, only for each annexation. Thank you.
Thank you. That makes sense then. If Wilson owned the pecan orchard and that was the sole area of annexation, then obviously he's going to vote for it.
Well, it depends again on the logical boundaries. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to know. That's a pretty
You're
big
only
question.
annexing a portion, you're saying the people within the portion of the ones that are going.
Right.
Okay. So suppose that eastern side of this whole development is built and annexed. It's one more reason why Shepherd Avenue needs to be widened on the northern side. Right now it's a two lane on the southern side only.
Mhm.
And over at Heritage Grove, it's going to be 4 lanes, I'm presuming. But and the pecan orchard could obviously become 4 lanes. But close to Fowler and then going up Fowler, the possibility of those properties turning into 4 lane seems like it kind of has to happen in order for development of this size to be added. What would be the process and I know what the impact would be on the landowners, but what would be the process of taking the land that's owned currently by residents there and widening the road?
So that's again, we haven't done the traffic study to know what the
Well, we
build out
can
would
pretty
be.
well presume that we can't get any more cars on that road than there are now.
I may, I mean, that question's pretty in the weeds, but I'll still have, if I can have Mike come up and address the process of what it would look like. I mean, it's something that would be much further down the road and we don't have traffic studies to know, but as a general matter, I'll have Mike answer what the process would be in terms of.
So generally, the way we build roads is as development occurs. We typically don't have the money to go out and do big projects unless there's a grant funding source or something like that we could do a project. So if there were such a project that I identified for Fowler Avenue, and that was your example, the city would have to determine what the right-of-way needs are. The city would have to establish what the fair market value is and make offers to the individual property owners to acquire the right-of-way needed for the project.
Would the funding of that come from the developer that is going to be adding all the additional traffic to the road? Or would you simply, can I walk up to the map? Is that okay?
Yes. So the answer is yes. When we get to a point where we're doing a widening project, whether it be the city or the developer, we'd be approaching landowners to purchase the property needed. Yes.
My concern is I've lived out in this area and I've seen Highland Ranch get built and tons of cars come down Shepherd and then veer through my neighborhood, which is a CSA of the county, and people going 40, 50 miles an hour down what would otherwise be a 25-mile-an-hour road because of kids there and whatnot. So we've got a very dangerous situation that we were told because of the low density of our neighborhood, we couldn't do anything about that. Then the city did develop the stoplight eventually at Fowler and Shepherd, and that improved situation. However, there's still cars that cut through there. So now if the development occurs over here, and we add even more traffic, if we don't develop the street all the way through simultaneously, then we're just going to be in a mess until people start getting killed and attention levels get raised once again. So would there be some sort of way that you can make sure that the city and the developer work together to properly develop the whole road before any such annexation occurs that dumps all the traffic onto another county road?
So the answer is yes. Developers do pay their share of the road improvement program, and it's built in an incremental fashion. Because that's the way the money comes in, is in an incremental fashion, and it's most expedient to build those facilities when development is adjacent to that. But part of the analysis that we're going to do is establishing what the transportation needs are, where the traffic's going to be, and what the improvements need to be to the existing roads, and when those might need to occur. So yes,
It won't be after the fact if we can make sure that the EIR identifies and traffic studies identify that they definitely.
correct.
That's really important to avoid that. And then last, I guess, on a follow-up question. Sure.
I know we have a few questions in the queue here online that I want to get to, and I'll come back to you at the end.
Craig Howard asked, was the sphere of influence increased from around 100 to 800 and now 1,000? Why the increase?
So the question was regarding the kind of history of the increase in sphere of influence boundary, and the simple answer is that we respond to a request from applicants. So originally it started in an area that was more confined to the pecan orchard, and then the request was then modified to include a larger acre, which was approximately 800, which is what we took to City Council most recently back in August. And then as a result of kind of making more of a logical boundary in the eyes of the Clovis City Council anyways, that's when it ultimately got squared off at Beeheimer to Sunnyside, which added approximately 200 more acres, which, in total tonight, the request is approximately 1,050 acres, give or take. So the answer to that question really is just we're responding to a request from direction by our City Council. We'll do another question online.
We have a question from Jared Callister. He asked, who decides whether an annexation boundary is logical?
Dave, if you heard that question from Jared Callister, he's asking what determines the definition of a logical boundary, at least through LAFCO's eyes.
A logical boundary is consistent with LAFCO policy. It avoids peninsulas and the shape of the city, proposed city limit. I'm trying not to be too bureaucratic here. Basically, a logical boundary is something that's essentially squared off so that services that need to connect don't have to go around or a circuitous route. It's also service delivery like parks, police, fire, things like that need to be addressed as well.
Thank you. Okay. Sure, go ahead and, do you mind coming up? Yeah, well, it's really just so people online can hear you, and I don't want to leave anyone out online, so thank you.
When are they going to open Shepherd?
That's a good question. Looks like Renee has the answer.
Oh, good.
So, yeah, Shepherd's been closed off for some time now. The latest direction, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, is it should be open here by the end of this month. Yes, correct? Yes, good, thank you. So we appreciate the patience. I know it has been closed and there's been a detour, and well, we appreciate your patience and bearing with us and the development that's occurring. We try to avoid full road closures when we can, but sometimes it's necessary due to the utilities that are being installed. So by the end of this month, you're going to have it open, and it's going to be a nice area. Okay, there you go.
Okay, let me take one more question online, and then I'll go back to you, the gentleman in the back. But Dave, I just heads up, this question may be for you.
E. Schmidt asked, can a protest be made by a landowner who is adjacent to, but not included in, a proposed annexation?
You want me to handle that?
Yeah, go for it, sure. I'm sure the expert.
Okay. So when we're talking about an annexation, anyone can object or testify to the commission. But the LAFCO process is different than, say, the city council process, where the city council looks to the voice of the people. But LAFCO, once we get down to the annexation level, if a protest comes from inside a project area, the area to be annexed or proposed to be annexed, that's sort of one side of the ledger. If somebody lives next to the area and voices their objection, the commission certainly will entertain their comments and try to find a middle ground here. But technically speaking, they don't have the ability to weigh in on that 25 and 50%. It has to be landowners or registered voters in the proposed annexation area. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to go to another question inside the senior center.
This is just a follow-up question on that, on those two thresholds of 25% and 50%. This is for annexation, and this is for within those districts, within the entire new sphere of influence. Presumably you divide these up, just like we spoke of a few minutes ago, into, intelligent contiguous blocks that aren't gerrymandered. When you said 25 or less, is that they issue a vote to the actual voters that are, registered voters that are within those districts, within the sphere of influence that's targeting to be annexed? Or what? Tell me about that. Just reiterate the 25% threshold and the 50% threshold.
You get that, Dave?
Yeah, I believe I got it. The gentleman was asking just for some clarification on the thresholds for protest.
Correct.
Okay, so imagine this. Let's just take the area that's a little bit darker than the rest of the proposed sphere. That would be the Spenceley's pecan orchard that Mr. Wilson owns now. Let's just say that dark area that Mr. Wilson came to the city agreed, city came to LAFCO, said, we just want to annex that. It's kind of like a big fat reverse L. And if this was posed to LAFCO as an annexation, I would look at my policies that really require me to recommend to the commission that we square off boundaries, that we make them, as an earlier caller asked, we make them logical. If he was to approach those property owners to his immediate north and they said, no way, then we might ask them to approach the property owners to Fowler. So to a certain extent, we put the applicant out there to deal with the property owners. But ultimately, what comes to the commission is going to be something that the developer and the city agree with. And it may include property owners that didn't initially want to be part of the annexation. And so that's when we look at, essentially, we start counting noses. And it's in statute. I'd be happy to follow up and provide this information to Ricky to give to the anybody interested. But it's in statute where if it's up to 25%, it could be approved. If it's 25 to 50%, it must go to an election. If it's more than 50%, the annexation must be terminated. That does not keep a developer from coming back and trying a reconfigured annexation boundary. So there's a little kind of horse trading that goes along in this process where we try at the LAFCO, we try to ensure that we've got a project that is successful and that nobody's led down the garden path thinking they're either going to stop it completely or they're going to get everything that they want. It's really kind of a negotiated process.
Okay, so you'll pardon my ignorance, but let's go with your example of the backward L that Wilson would like to develop. And the commission looks at it and says, no, the development to the northwest of that L needs to be included in this. And all of those long, skinny 2-acre lots that open out to Fowler, they all need to be included in this. And so you've got a nice square. Wilson wants it. And is there an actual vote of the people? Or when you say vote, is that a vote from LAFCO? Or is that a vote of the people that they go out and vote? Or do 51 to stop it? Would 51% of the people in that area that's inscribed by that square, if 51% of the people vote? Or tell me a little bit more about the process. Is it the people that vote, or is it LAFCO that votes?
Well, it would be the registered voters. If it's an inhabited annexation, which means 12 or more, we're getting, I hate to say it, but we're getting a little bit, as Ricky would say, into the weeds, but it's essentially prescribed in statute where if we have a project area of any size, it could be 2 acres or 2,000, but if the registered voters are sufficiently mobilized, they can essentially terminate the project. And that's something that
We lost you, Dave. You can hear us, but we'll give Dave a chance to log back in. Do you have any questions online? Okay, we'll go to one online and then I'll come back to you. I just want to do a time check. We have about 10 more minutes left, so I'll take one more online and then I'll try to get to yours in your last one. So.
Craig Howard asked, can I assume that the 88 acres was the original request from 2016 and that the other 900% increase was in the last 4 months?
That's one way to look at it, yes. The acreage has grown, but yes, the request was last modified in August, as I mentioned earlier. So the original request was more in the area of the pecan orchard, and the latest request that you see before us occurred at the last council meeting on this item back in August, this past August. So let me get a Paul's question and come back to yours, and then we'll have to wrap it up. So. Hey, yeah, you back? Dave? You there, Dave? Hang tight, Dave. We're going to go to one more question in here, and then we'll come back to you at the end.
Oh, okay, I also want to say hi to Dave. Probably.
You can still say hi to him. I think he can hear you. Paul says hi.
The area where the pecan is if that's annexed into the city, that pretty well makes the Dry Creek Preserve area just below it an island, a county island. Is there any maximum or minimum you're allowed to have a county island in Clovis, or is it just already going to be forced into the city from that?
Dave, I don't know if you're on yet, but so again, we don't have an application for that, so we'll have to look at it in terms of the creation of an island, and we don't have an answer yet in terms of what that's going to look like. I know that there's the annexation agreement, of course, in Dry Creek. So in terms of, I'm not sure I understand your question about forcing anyone in the Dry Creek to,
Well,
annex is
there's
part of
certain
it, but-
things where I guess certain county and everything else says we don't want county islands within city limits.
right, understand.
And I don't know if there's a certain minimum or maximum size that you're allowed to do
Your
a
office.
county island or.
Dave? Is that you, Dave?
Going in and out.
Yeah, I can get that. So we'll wait for Dave to come on. Yeah, I know there's provisions about creating islands in terms of like a number of islands. I don't know, or at least I'm
How large or
unaware
how
of
small it can be.
anything about how large or small they can be. But again, we're not there yet. That's going pretty far down in the
Well,
weeds. So
Like I say, as soon as you give allowance for them to develop a pecan orchard, that's going to cut us off and we'll do an island.
cut you off, how? What are you referring to when you say cut you off? And what would be your concern about being cut off, I guess?
Well, I'm just saying, am I going to be forced into the city because they'll eliminate us as being a county island?
I don't think you'd be forced into the city, at least not as part of anything that's going on here. At least not at this time. Again, we're not there yet. So, but at this time, we have no intention to force you into the city. So. Okay. Yeah, hang on a sec. Okay, let me do one more follow-up online and then I'll get to you. And then, so we'll take two more questions, one more online we're gonna get to, and then we're gonna do one more follow-up question at the senior center, and then we'll close this out.
So Craig is following up from his last question. Shouldn't we have to go back to step one from 2016 for the entire 1,000 acres? The new 900% increase have not had the 4-year benefit of the process.
So that was part of the reason of having to go back to council in August as well. So I'm not sure I understand your question, Craig, about the benefit of a 4-year process. It wasn't necessarily intentionally supposed to be 4 years. It's just kind of how these things move along at this pace. So in terms of properly vetting the proposed request, that was the purpose of the August meeting. So that's where we're at. I'll take one more follow-up question in here, and then we'll do a little clip.
Sorry, real quick, the annexation that Dave was talking about, he was suggesting that you make squares and pull things in. Would that also include roads and traffic, or is that really just related to utilities? So in other words, if traffic is going up Fowler as a result of it, are they going to bring that into an annexation in order to improve that road? Does it become part of the city?
Yeah, so depending on the area that would be annexed, and kind of going back to what Mike was saying, necessary infrastructure is going to be needed, including water, sewer, roads, sidewalks, as part of whatever project needs to be served in that area. So yes, that would become part of the city. And if we're using the example of kind of that square there, Perrin and Fowler, and the pecan orchard hypothetically was going to be developed out, and Lapwing direction or whatever was to annex that whole area in, then that area, that piece of Fowler would ultimately become part of the city. You're assuming that it would have to be widened, but we don't know that yet. So generally speaking, yes, that would become part of the city. Okay, so with that, we're going to wrap it up. Again, anybody that's online, I have my information on there. Please do check the city's website towards the end of the month. We're going to have a dedicated page for this project for updates. It'll have tonight's PowerPoint on there, so you can refer to that. I'm going to go to the slide right now with my contact information. If you weren't able to speak tonight or you have any follow-up questions, please do reach out to me. And I will provide you a response or get you in touch with people that have the responses that you need. So I thank everyone for their time tonight, and we'll be in touch. Good night.